Hi guys, I'm Mary Poplin with Imagineer Systems, and we had originally recorded this live, but unfortunately the video and the audio didn't sync up very well, so we are re-recording this for you. So the breakdown is this. Removing object and clean plating is one of the most challenging tasks in post and visual effects. This webinar is to show you how Mocha Pro can help you save lots of time over traditional clone and paint techniques. Simple Mocha Pro remove is going to be how we're going to start out. Basically, we're going to go over basic techniques and luminance and render settings. We're going to do a remove with clean plate creation, why some shots need clean plates, how to save the clean plate, where it lives, and how to link it in, and multi-plane removes, how to deal with complex backgrounds and removes that have multiple objects. You can find us all over the internet. We're at www.imagineersystems.com. We also have a forums, a Vimeo, a YouTube, a Facebook, and we are also on Twitter. All right, so what are some of the tasks that we use Mocha for removes on? So for stuff like this, you want to use Mocha tracks, and in this case patches or paint, for rig removal. This is the Born Identity. Or Adobe FX was able to remove rigs from this boy very, very easily using Mocha Pro, even though it removes over water. Or this shot from Looper where we had to have pegs to keep the actor's hands from being smashed, and Mocha helped us remove those from the scene so that they weren't visible. And finally, stuff like this from Spider-Man, more rig removal, but this time over complex objects. This is going to be a combination of Mocha removes and paint. In this Spider-Man shot in particular, Mocha actually did about 80% of the work and the rest was paint touch-ups. But stuff like this, the remove also knocks out a lot of work for you automatically, especially when it goes over a planar background like it does in the corner of this shot. Alright, I also want to point out before we do anything else, you can always go to our videos section and you can always browse our videos section if you have something that you need to know and you want to know exactly how to do it. We have stuff by category. We also have our videos sorted by what they are. So in this case, video series that I highly recommend is Mocha Fundamentals. If you sort it from oldest to newest, you'll end up starting at chapter 1 and going through chapter 22. The other mostly underutilized resource on our website is this little search bar right here. If you're ever looking for something like remove, you can type that in right here in our search and it will give you results on our webpage. If you ever have any really serious questions that you don't know how to answer on your own, you can go to contact support and we are here to help you. But we also have a FAQ that is literally just the most common questions people ask us and their solutions right there for you. You can also download a trial of Mocha Pro if you want to follow along with this on our current version downloads. And if you want a project to get started on what is Mocha, if you're really a beginner, you can select what is Mocha Pro. You can go over here to getting started, and there's actually footage you can download and follow along with a video and screenshots. Alright, so moving right along, we have this lovely remove shot. And I kind of want to show you what we're going to go for and what we're going to, where we're going to start and where we're going to finish, okay? So where we're starting is our original clip, and you can see we've got this boom mic right here in our reflection. Well, that's really, really visible, and we want to remove it. So here's what our render looks like when we're all done with it. So how do we get here? What do we do to remove this mic from the shot? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our track tab. Inside of our track tab, we're going to track our boom mic. Now, this is going to be really easy. What we're going to do is we're going to take our X spline and we are going to draw a spline right around the rig that we are trying to remove, just like this. And we're going to use X splines to relax with our rope and pulley curve manipulator. For a curve, if you want corners, you pull tight, but we're going to relax this into a nice curve because that's really nice when you're painting. You get a curved edge, it looks better. And now we're going to go ahead and track this backwards. We're going to track translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective. Okay, but actually I think we're going to track only translation, scale, and rotation and shear. We don't need perspective because this isn't really moving in Z space. And if it's not moving in Z space, you want to leave that off because Mocha is a computer and it will believe you. So we're going to call this new mic. And we're going to go ahead and hit track backwards. And if we've done everything correctly, Mocha will follow that mic right off screen. And you see how it doesn't follow it completely all the way off? Well, now we're going to just switch to translation only and see if we can get it to follow the mic off. And it still can't, so we don't care. We're just going to actually just do a correction on that using keyframes. So let's just go ahead and make a keyframe here. And let's just do a little bit of Roto, just like this. And we're just going to correct our shape. And what Mocha will do is Mocha will tween between the animation that we have made and the track, just like that. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to define the background. Now, the background is how we tell Mocha how we're going to replace these pixels. What are we going to use to replace these pixels with? So, what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to take our X-spline and we're going to make a little bit better Roto. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to grab all of this edge and I'm going to be very careful about grabbing my car debris here. And we're going to be very careful about this Roto edge, because this Roto edge matters, because this Roto edge is how Mocha is going to define where we're removing. So it's only going to remove where these two shapes overlap. Now we're going to call this new BG. And we're going to take new BG and we're going to drag it under new mic. Okay. Now we're going to track translation, scale, rotation, and shear. Again, we don't really need perspective. And we're going to go ahead and hit track forward. But the really important thing to note is we dragged the BG under the microphone. Okay, the reason we did that is because we are tracking objects that are underneath the microphone. And if we don't account for holding this out, we will have the microphone corrupt our background data. So the way Mocha handles that is Mocha treats everything at the top of the layer pile as closest to the camera and everything at the bottom of the layer pile as furthest from the camera. Now, the cool thing about that is that because Mocha is, this is part of the normal Mocha workflow, it actually means that if you roto from the foreground to the background, you'll always have holdout shapes for every single thing that you do. Now, we're going to go ahead and hit track. So we're going to track this forward. And again, you will see that we're getting a decent track of this object. If we need to correct any roto, we can. I feel like we need to correct a little bit of roto. Let's look at what our track is doing. So that track is not actually great. So what I want to do instead of tracking shear is we're going to turn shear off. This is a teaching moment, okay? You never want to try to just live with a bad track when you do a remove. Like anything in Mocha, your remove is only going to be good as your original track. So let's just go ahead and retrack this. And look, we end up with a much, much, much nicer track. Now that's going to matter for when we do our remove. So now we just go ahead, make sure our roto is correct the whole way through, because again, the roto matters. Let's just correct this to here, just like this. Roto matters. All right, and now we're going to select our microphone. We're going to go to our remove tab, and with our just default settings, we should just be able to go ahead and hit render forward. And Mocha should be able to replace the microphone using the information that is behind it, which is to say new BG. And so now we end up with this very decent remove that we can then composite back into the shot. If we want to feather edges or soften anything, we can just do that very, very easily. So let's just play that in motion. There we go. And we can composite this back into the shot using the original plate as the background, the new render of the remove as the foreground, and we can use our export shape data and either export a shape data for After Effects or shape data for Nuke, and we can use that to composite the two together and end up with something that looks perfect. I actually really recommend that workflow, by the way. You always want to take your new plate, composite over your old plate, and do things like match grains, because you'll end up with a better result. All right, so the next shot that we need to work on is a much more complex shot. We have this hand here of the camera guy that's visible in this scene. And this movie, the conceit of this movie is that it's all one take. It's a fluid motion. They used Mocha to connect all the scenes, but they also used Mocha to get rid of crew and camera guys in a very tight set. So things like this happen when you're filming close-up actresses in mirrors. You're going to get some of the crew sometimes in the mirror, so we need to get rid of that. Now you can see this is a fairly complex setup, so let's talk about how we remove this. Let's delete all of this. All right, so the first thing we're going to do for this shot is we're going to track the frame here. Now, I kind of want to point out right quick, we have a color space right here where we can actually go ahead and up our gamma so that we can see what's going on in the shot better. However, if you up the gamma in the color space here in your clip tab, you're going to actually end up with your color space being rendered that way. We can also adjust it right here by selecting this icon, enable brightness scaling, and we can go ahead and scale this up as well, and we can still see our shot. Now, when we adjust our color space, it can actually help us with the track. So let's go to our track. And you can see that we still have quite a lot of flickering going on in this shot, all right? So watch what happens if I try to track this frame. We need to track the frame first because the frame is actually closest to the camera. It seems counterintuitive, but it is. And that's because the frame and the wall are actually, objects that are moving in the foreground foremost plane, okay? So we're going to go ahead and take our X-spline and we are going to just draw an X-spline right around the frame here. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab the other part of the frame using the Add to X-spline tool. And you'll notice we're making tracks on the same layer. So now if I turn my mat on, you can see I'm tracking here and I'm tracking here. And I'm using that for stability. Now I'm going to turn my surface tool on and I'm going to arrange my surface tool right here on my frame. I'm doing this not for Mocha, but for me, so that I can see what my track is doing at all times. And I'm going to call this frame track, okay? And now if I track translation, scale, rotation, shear, and perspective, we're going to have a problem. I'm going to show you why. When I try to track this, what's going to happen is those lighting flickers, Mocha's going to interpret that as a texture change, okay? But it's not a texture change because Mocha's a texture tracker. So we're going to trick it. We're going to tell it to just track translation, scale, and rotation. And now Mocha will do a much better job of holding on because it is no longer interpreting those lighting changes as shear or perspective shifts. Now that's really important. You can also change what you're tracking at any time. If I found that it was flickering later in the shot but not in the beginning, I could go ahead and turn shear off for a couple of frames and turn it back on. I could also go in here into my dope sheet and I could get access to my tracking keyframes as they're being made, and I could manipulate this data however I wanted. Like for instance, say I didn't like a rotation wobble, I could go ahead and select those couple of keyframes and I could just delete them, and then I would have access to that data in a really handy way. Now let's go ahead and let this finish tracking, but again I want you to notice that it's hanging on pretty well. We don't actually need this to be super perfect, but we need it to be close enough to where my roto will be nice, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be rotoing out the frame here. The reason we're doing that is because the frame actually moves over the hand. If we don't have a good roto shape moving over the hand, we're going to get a really bad render. So the way we're going to handle that is we're going to use this to drive roto, because roto in Mocha is our roto assistant, okay? So it cuts your keyframes down to about a third of what you would normally use, so it cuts your roto time in half, and let's talk about why that is. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn my frame gear off, because the gear is the action item in Mocha. You're either tracking or rendering when the gear is on. We're going to lock it so that I don't rewrite over this, and we're going to go ahead and just hide it visibly because it's not important for me to see it anymore. But what is important is that I come in here and select my X-spline tool, and I make a really nice roto right here, and I'm going to grab some of this grunge as well, right around this frame, just like this. So I end up with some nice hard edges to hold out from my hand, just like this. Now, I'm going to go ahead and relax for a curve, and I'm going to pull tight for only where I need straight lines. So right here, and right here, and right here. All right, so what I'll end up with is a really nice shape around the grunge that's on the mirror, and that can be held out from the hand. So now I'm going to go over to link to track, and I'm going to link this to frame track. So now my roto is going to move really nicely with the rest of my shot. Now I can see that there's a problem here. So when I go over here, I can see that my grunge, I misjudged where my grunge was. So I'm going to zoom in, and we're going to select our Uber key, which is basically a ripple offset. And even though we're here at the beginning of the shot, we're going to adjust our Uber key just like this. And now, even though we've changed it, it's going to remain the same throughout the shot, which is pretty nice. That's what we mean by a ripple offset. Although when you're done with the Uber key, go ahead and turn auto key back on, because it's a really good way to continue to damage your tracking data if you don't do that. Well, your shape data. I'm going to call this frame hold out, okay, because we're literally going to hold it out from the hand. Now, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to find the hand and where it's actually the most jutting out, and I'm going to go ahead and draw a shape right around the hand, just like this. And we're going to soften that. And we're going to go ahead and track translation only and call this hand. We're going to drag hand under frame holdout. And now I'm going to track this forwards and backwards, just like that. And because we're only tracking translation, it's going to do a really good job of just holding onto that hand because it's trying to match it as it moves over time. And again, we're going to track this to the beginning. All right, so now that we have our hand tracked, we're going to actually do some corrections here on the mirror. Now, you can see that we actually still have a little bit of grunge. Now, this is going to be important because what we're going to track next is the background, so I'm going to go ahead and turn my Uber key back on. I'm going to adjust some of this grunge roto, and I'm going to use my Add to X-Spline tool and grab some of this grunge as well, just like that. And now all of that is added to our frame holdout without any more problems. Again, it will just follow everything really nicely through the shot. All right, and we're going to correct our hand roto just a little bit. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually track the background. Okay, we're going to track the background by tracking the banisters. So we're going to come in here. And I'm going to track these banisters loosely because they give me the best tracking information. The reason they give me the best tracking information is because I want to avoid the parallax of tracking the wall and get the banisters and the wall at the same time. The banisters are going to be the most noticeable object when I'm trying to do my remove if they're off, so that's why I'm going to track them. So we're going to call this banister. And we're going to go ahead and hit translation, scale, and rotation because we don't really need shear and perspective. And again, everything is flickering, so I want to make sure that we don't have any problems there. I'm going to put all of this under the frame holdout and the hand, and we're just going to go ahead and hit track forwards. And while this is tracking forwards, we're just going to go ahead and turn our grid and surface tool on so that we can see what our track is doing, because again, we don't need to do that, but it's good for us to check our track because, as I was saying before, literally everything you do in Mocha is only going to be as good as your track. Okay? Now, once we're done tracking this, we're going to actually link a larger shape up to that, and we're going to use that to replace the information behind the hand. And that's what we're going to call our BG track. The reason we do that is because Mocha actually looks at all of the information that's moving behind the object to replace it. But in this shot, there's not going to be enough information to replace the hand, so we're going to have to invent that information where it doesn't exist. So we're going to create our larger shape, and then we're going to actually have to create a clean plate in Mocha. Now Mocha does this really handy thing for you where it will actually just take a freeze frame from your shot and it will save it to your results folder. Now usually people can't find that, but I'm going to show you exactly where it is. So let's go ahead and check that track. It looks really good, so we're going to go ahead and turn the gear off on that. We're going to lock it, okay? We're going to lock our frame holdout as well for right now, and we're going to hide the banister track. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make a larger shape, just like this. that's going to move very neatly behind the hand. And we're going to call this BG, okay? And we're going to drag this right under hand, and we're going to go to link to track, and we're going to link BG to banister. And just like that, we've got this really nice movement behind our hand. So now we need to find where the hand is most in frame, and we're going to go ahead and click on our hand, click on remove, okay? And if we try to remove this by looking at everything in the scene, we're going to have a problem, okay? We're not going to be able to do it. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to create a clean plate. So we're going to hit create clean plate, and we're going to go to Photoshop. In Photoshop, we're going to paint out our hand. So we're going to go to remove webinar new footage. We're going to go to silent house. We're going to go to our results folder, and we're going to check and see what frame we were on, which is 110, okay? And at frame 110, we're going to go ahead and in Photoshop, we're going to grab frame 110. That's going to be clean plate 110. We're going to open that. And what you're going to see is we have this hand right here that needs to be painted out. All right, so the way we're going to do that is we're going to just super sloppy paint this out. We're just going to, I'm going to select my banister. I'm going to paint over that just like this. All right, and we're going to select our banister again, and we're going to way over paint. We're going to way over paint our banister, and the reason we're over painting it is because of how Mocha works. Mocha really needs to see behind the object, and the problem is if you are not careful, you can end up ruining the details of your shot. So we're going to call that almost done. So let's just come in here. There we are. All right, so we're going to call that done. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Okay, so we're just going to go File, Save. And now, back in our shot, I'm going to take this back to our normal gamma, our normal brightness, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use clean plates exclusively. This is important because if I don't click use clean plates exclusively, Mocha will not be able to use the clean plate to replace the background pixels, because what it'll do is it'll use other frames to replace those background pixels, and it doesn't know there's no hand there or there shouldn't be a hand there. So you're just going to replace hand with hand, which is not going to work. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit Illumination Modeling, okay? And we're going to go ahead and use Linear Illumination Modeling, and we're going to go ahead and hit Render Forwards. And now Mocha is going to do its best to remove this hand. And it's going to use our clean plate to do that. And then because we're using linear illumination modeling, it's going to try to match the lighting, basically based on the shape that we have drawn around the hand. And it's going to use those pixels to try and replace the image and fix the hue, saturation, and value of the areas around that spline and change them inside the spline. If you use interpolate, it actually does that on a much broader scale. It searches for different sections and then tries to replace those different sections based on, and does a weighted remove on that. I don't want to make you sit through this render, so we're just going to go ahead and show you the render. And it looks something like this. Alright, so this shot is a rig removal, and I'm not going to make you sit through me rotoing the guy, but I am going to talk about how we did this shot, since we've already gone over the techniques in detail. So, once we're all done with our remove, we end up with a remove that looks like this, which is really pretty nice for an automatic removal process. Now, that being said, we do have to be thoughtful about how we work on this project, alright? Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn the Roto on to where you can see it. If you look, I have basically done several garbage mats on my guy to separate him from the background. This is really important because when I do my background track, okay, my background track actually has to be rock solid. Now I can't do a really large background track if I have this guy in the way. Also, the background itself needs to be large because of how much space our cable is taking up. Like if we go here towards the end of our shot, it's not very much, but if we go to the beginning, we have all of the ceiling taken up by cable. So in order to counteract that, what we have to do is we have to make this large shape where we can use that reference to delete the string, okay? So these are really sloppy roto shapes. They have like a couple of keyframes on them a piece. They're nothing to write home about. Most of them are actually just using translation, scale, and rotation. Some of them just translation, okay? Now, the string itself, I actually ended up mostly like rotoing and tracking by hand. It's not very clean, like it's not very cleanly tracked roto because it was so thin and it was so similar to the background that we just didn't grab it as well as I would like, because this grid up here is way more juicy to hang on to than the string is itself. All right. The last thing we did though was track the ceiling. The ceiling is the most important track, but I want you to notice how large the mask is for the ceiling. Okay. Do you see how much the guy overlaps that? That's because we have to keep this string inside of our ceiling shape at all times. And then that's so that Mocha can do an automatic replacement, okay? So now if we select our string and we try to do a remove, basically let's just go ahead and hit render on this frame. What you're going to see is that Mocha's going to do its best to remove this whole string. And it does that with no clean plates. We're with none. So we end up with this really nice remove based on Mocha looking behind the string in order to replace the string. Or the wire, as we call it. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is how do you remove over multiplanar objects? All right. Now in this shot, I've selected mats so that you can see what we're trying to remove. We're trying to remove this pole that's moving through the foreground, and we're trying to remove its buddy over here, pole number 2. All right. Now, the way we remove these is actually not that complicated. It just looks complicated. All right. We actually need to do multiple tracks. All right. And we do these tracks individually. And since I've already showed you how to track, I'm not going to basically show you more of how to track. Essentially, we have stacked our layer order with we have this weird little gnome over here. We have our small pole and our big pole, and we've made sure that those are all in the foreground. We've tracked our ground next because that's the next closest thing to the camera. And again, you can see that our track is really nice. All right, just using our planar track, very, very simple. And we have the left wall, the right wall, and the middle wall, all tracked, okay? So what we end up with is this lovely set of tracks to pull from to replace our poles. Now, where it gets interesting is we have this tool, okay? And this tool is called the Join Layers tool. And what it does is it hooks points to one another and locks them together so that no matter how you move them, they always move together. All right, so this is really useful for creating an area with no seams on things like walls. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove these poles just by layer order. We make sure that we have all of our tracked background layers below our poles. We have our 2 poles, okay, and we have our occlusion here on the top. So we're just going to take our 2 poles and we're going to be in our Remove tab. All right, we're just going to turn on both of these gears, and you can see that we're just looking behind in order to remove these. All right, and now when we render, we end up with this lovely shot, just like this. And it's like the poles were never there. Let me zoom in so you can sort of see what that looks like. Turn our thumbnail off. Notice that because we have our remove seams pinned together, there is no seam even when these things cross the background. Now, all of your renders that are being made when you hit render in Mocha are being saved to your results folder. But if you don't want to use your results folder, you can actually export these renders by going to File, Export Rendered Clip. So you go to File, and you go to Export Rendered Clip, and now this will export our removes. We can export them to either an image sequence or a QuickTime movie and just hit OK. And then if we hit QuickTime, it'll ask us for a what kind of QuickTime codec do we want to use. In this case, animation is really nice to me, but we also have whatever is on my machine codec-wise, like H.264 would be perfectly good. But with things like animation, you need to hit keyframe. When it says keyframe every frame, you need to basically make sure that you put data in there, and then when you hit OK, it will save your file out for you. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm sorry that we experienced some lag when we were doing the original demo, but I have gone ahead and re-recorded this for you, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let us know. We are at www.imagineersystems.com, and you can contact support, and I or Martin or one of our team will get back to you. We hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.